in the office today. That's kind of the return to a new normal-ish. The team, we spend one day together in the office, and then we have different teams on different days. So it's sort of a hybrid, but we'll see what that looks like going forward. So I like to say we know a lot about a little at Nourish. We are food marketing experts. We work across the whole food ecosystem, and we're here to try to create meaning and value across that whole food ecosystem. And we're really a one-stop shop. We do everything from original research to brand creation, packaging, and then the whole integrated marketing and everything else that goes with that. And I like to say that we've got kind of a privileged place because we work across the whole food ecosystem. So we work with commodity groups, producers, manufacturers, food service, retailers, not-for-profits. So because of that, we're able to kind of connect dots, I think, that maybe others don't see. So we've been doing a trend report. I think this is our 6th year. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but also talk about some of what we're seeing since that time. And I'll say we've got a pretty good track record. And at the end, I'll give you a link. You can download this. You can download past years as well. Because a lot of these trends, when we talk about trends, we're not talking about fads. We're not talking about, that cool charcoal ice cream that somebody had. We're talking about those seismic changes that are going to resonate for decades going forward. And that's why even past trend reports might be of interest. So some people are calling last year, or, I guess we're kind of still in it, the year of the asterisk. So is that fair? And yes, life is starting to go back to, as Sandra said, normal-ish. But we know that behavior changes over, what is it, three weeks to start a new habit. And we've been at this for about 16 months. So I do think there have been some fundamental shifts and changes in our relationship with food. And that's, how we source it, what we look for it, how we prepare it, how we consume it. And so, what is that new normal going to look like after we've seen such a profound disruption in our life, but also our food system? And, some people are saying we could see a roaring 20s again. One thing to think about, though, is this is what they call a K-shaped recovery, as I'm sure you've seen yourself. So, those who kept their jobs during COVID, they actually saw their discretionary income go up because what could you spend it on? But those largely in food service, hospitality, we've seen record food bank usage as well. So it really is a K-shaped recession. But we're also seeing that pent up desire for spending as well. And I'll talk to that in a little bit. But, we probably are going to be living with COVID at some point, which is, the way we live with colds and flus. That's probably going to be the new normal. So, you look at this cute picture. Will we ever look at behaviors like blowing, the candles out on a birthday cake and then handing out those pieces in quite the same way that we did before? And no matter how you look at it, there is a finite pie in terms of our time, our energy, and our money. And so we've really rethought during the pandemic what matters to us and how we're going to change going forward. Now, one thing that really has changed is before the pandemic, we were spending about 10 hours of our life a day online. That's actually now over 13 hours. Crazy, right? And so that's a fundamental change. We're largely living our lives online, even with opening up. And we're seeing a lot of splurge or revenge spending right now because people have that pent up desire. They've got that discretionary income. I was surprised even in the early days of the pandemic, jewelry sales, record levels. That's not something I would have foreseen. Like, who's going to have bling on when they're not seeing anybody? But that's what people were putting it into. Instead of the trip, they did that. Instead of being able to eat in a fine restaurant, they splurged at the grocery store and bought that prime rib. So there was a lot of those trading ups as well. And we know that nothing tastes as good as food with a story. And a lot of you in the breakout rooms, I saw some of the themes was just how local and how supporting your community was so important. And it's true, during the pandemic, our world really did get a lot smaller. And so we've seen consumer interest in local food go way up. And when I say local food, I don't just mean the end product. It's the whole supply chain that consumers are now looking at it. And we're seeing more global or more domestic tourism, right? People, as the world opens up, they're still staying kind of within their province, within their country, more staycations, and you know, more domestic tourism, you know, similar to, you know, those farm visits that you see in Europe. So I think that's going to be something going forward. And the other thing about local is those of you who are in the business, you know that our eggs are local. You know that our milk is local. Our oats are local. But consumers don't know that. So you have to really call that out as well. You know, you'll get bonus points as well for calling that out, because we know that local ingredients are seen as being fresher and tastier as well. Another thing that's happening is we're spending more time in nature. That was really a big part of how consumers got through the pandemic, right? Going out for walks and just being outside. Going into the pandemic, we had a lot of food to go, a lot of portability, because we were busy, we were on the run, we were eating in our cars, we were eating in our desks. That's kind of changing a bit. So it's food to go now, but think about how you can satisfy that need state of eating outside, because we do think that that's going to continue. So consumers are going to be looking for more, you know, playful, portable items that they can eat and share. So it's not just about that protein bar for one that you've got in your minivan. It's now about those beautiful picnics that consumers can get from you and then can go out and share within their group as well. So I think it was our 2018 trend report. We talked about one of our trends was radical transparency. And to be honest, I don't think that producers and processors were ready for that. But now they have no choice, because the veil has really fallen between consumers and the supply chain. For the first time ever in most people's lifetime, they went into the store and they saw empty shelves, right? And so that really shook people up. And so now consumers are demanding more transparency from their food products. And that's a way to really win consumer loyalty and get them to shift. And you know, when your food system and meat packing, when these things are front page news as they were early in the pandemic, frankly, even today, you know, I saw about empty shelves in the UK. So there's still supply chain issues, and I think there will be going forward. And we saw consumers starting to Google words like food system, supply chain. These are not consumer terms normally, but it's become part of what consumers want to know. You know, now that the veil's been lifted, they want to go even deeper. And we know from some other research, consumers trust farmers. They don't necessarily trust farming practices. So it's really important to put a face, a name, a story around things. And they want to understand the whole, the root of that food and everything that touched it. And we call that made matters. So it's, you know, how is the earth treated? How were the workers treated? How were the animals treated if animals were involved? How is the environment treated? And it's just a collection of terms, but made matters. This is going to get bigger and bigger. And there's some interesting ways of doing this supply chain transparency. This is an Irish potato chip company, and they actually are potato farmers who got into potato chips. And they have this thing on the back of the pack that's called SpudNav. So you can put this into a browser and it will instantly take you to a picture of where the potato chips, where the potatoes that are in the potato chips in your bag were grown, right? Talk about, you know, making that taste even better, right? You know, it's going to look like a fresher product compared to, you know, that Lay's potato chip perhaps that's next to it. So I really encourage you to think about how can you show your farm's food to fork journey. And one thing that we saw during COVID was the rise of the QR code, right? You may not have known what it was before, but you know what it is now. And that's been around, frankly, for decades. And it's a collection of data. Those are all little data points. But, you know, it's adoption. All generations are using it now. It's partly helped adoption, not just COVID, but the fact that, you know, we now have built-in QR code readers into all of our smartphones. And so I think there's a great opportunity to let consumers go deeper through a QR code. And I put this up as an example of, you know, how far it's going. This is the leading chain, retailer chain in Italy, Coop Italia. And now they are actually letting the shopper see the entire supply chain for their products just in the palm of their hand. So they can snap that QR code anywhere in the store and know the journey and all the inputs that went into that product. So I challenge you to think about, what does meaningful transparency mean for you? Like, how far back can you pull that veil? And I always say words on a website are one thing, pictures are better. But if you can take something, you know, a video or something, even almost live streaming conditions, if that's possible, that's going to build trust. That's going to put a face and a story around your food. And I think for local producers especially, that's a way to really connect and win versus maybe some of the bigger players who can't do that. So we've all been alluding to this, how much local matters. And, you know, we've seen this rise in food nationalism as part of food security, frankly. And consumers say that they're actually willing to pay extra for products that are locally grown. And when I say local, it's a very elastic term. So those of you, you know, within the Holland Marsh may think local Holland Marsh, but it can really expand to provincial and also Canadian borders. So if I were, you know, a Torontonian, for instance, as I am, I'm coming to you from Toronto today, I would consider Vancouver local and not Buffalo, even though there's thousands of kilometers difference in that. We've seen on surveys that local actually, in terms of trust factors, it's ahead of organics even. And organics have been, you know, having record, they're having a hard time fulfilling the demand there. So, you know, if you need to highlight local, even if you don't assume your consumers know, and don't assume consumers know that your inputs, if you're using local inputs as well. So call those out, give them a story, give them a face, romance them, give them a provenance. And again, you know, call out those things that are local year round as well. Mushrooms, that's another one that's local year round that consumers may not know. So of course, you know, locals are a great idea, but we know that we can't grow everything locally. We have a relatively short growing season for produce. But the good news is Canadians actually perceive products grown in greenhouses and vertical farms to be as good, if not better, than those grown conventionally. And we're seeing this rise of what I call hyper local, and this is a great example. You can't get much more hyper local than this. I don't know if any of you have seen this in your Sobeys grocery store, but this is an in-farm unit where you can actually see the products growing, and they're fresh, cut and picked and put out there, and you can get your cone. And you know, you have to remember, we eat with our eyes first, and the smells of those herbs, the sight of it growing, you know, it's not a cheap date. If you've tried it, a small cone of herbs, I think it's about $5, but it's great theater in there as well, and a great way of Sobeys saying that, you know, we want to provide something that's fresh and local. And we're seeing more and more these national grocery chains really want to support local suppliers. Quite often now, when you walk into a store, what's the first thing you see? It's local, it's Foodland Ontario. That's a way of them upping their quality credentials. But chains like Sobeys, for instance, they've actually built local development managers to go out, and they're on the road trying to find suppliers like yourselves and regional growers that they can bring into their grocery store. And this is a really big change for grocery stores. Grocery stores used to all be about a central distribution point and national going out that way. But they've seen that they were losing on this local trend. And Sobeys actually, over the past year, they've actually doubled the number of local products that they're carrying and are highlighting in store. So I think that's really good news. So, should you be thinking more local in your marketing in terms of calling it out? So what do we want from food, and how has that changed? Well, I mentioned that we shifted some of that discretionary income. And, I think one of the positives coming out of COVID that I think will have a lasting effect is we went back to, we rediscovered the joy of family mealtime. It was something we look forward to. And for one of the first times in a long time, everybody sat down as a family and ate dinner. And we know that that creates healthier families as well. And, those 3 square meals a day were also something that kind of provided something to look forward and pillars in our day. And, research says 85% of Canadians want to continue that eating, even when life gets busier. They want to sit down and eat that dinner together at least as much as before. And so we've seen that shift. I mentioned that shift of discretionary income. But another thing we're seeing is huge food inflation. Inflation overall is going up. Food inflation going up even more, especially for anything with animal proteins. Right now, I think we're looking at, almost 10% in a month. It's crazy. We've never seen that kind of level. And food service prices are going up and will go up more in the future just because of labor shortages, supply chain input costs going up. There's that kind of COVID test. So you're also going to see people reconsidering like what is value and what is the value of convenience. I think during COVID, and this will be a lasting change, we've come to redefine what health is. And health has become about whole health, and that means our mental well-being. And people understand the connection now between food and mood. If you think about at the start of the pandemic, what was the big trending recipe? Everybody was baking banana bread, right? And then everybody was baking sourdough bread. And, these are comfort foods. And I think what we're going to see is a relaxation around diet culture. Those few extra pounds that people put on during COVID, there's a trade-off, right? You want to enjoy that really delicious oatmeal chocolate chip cookie and not feel guilty about it. And if you're packing a few extra pounds, that's the trade-off in terms of mental health. I know in the US, there was an expectation that as the world was opening up, and they're ahead of us, so we quite often look south for trends. There was this expectation that Weight Watchers would have a really great quarter financially because people would want to get rid of those pandemic pounds. Because the COVID-15 is a real thing for a lot of people. And so the street was expecting great results. Actually, Weight Watchers saw subscriptions actually go way down. So, consumers are not looking at diet. It's just changed a lot. And there's a saying in extraordinary times, we reach for the ordinary. And, that's why we've seen this rise of comfort foods. It makes us feel, it harkens back to a time when we felt safer. And when we're in times like this, things that are too innovative, too out there, it's a little too risky. It doesn't make us feel safe. As things open up, though, I think you're going to see those comfort foods being elevated. So perhaps we're going to add a functional ingredient to that oatmeal chocolate chip cookie. We'll add some flax seeds. So I think the next step is going to be elevated comfort foods, but don't feed me insects because I'm not ready for that. And that's we're looking for food and beverage to actually help us on our health journeys, to whether it's to treat a specific condition or just general prevention, right? We saw, huge jumps in vitamin C, vitamin D, as a way of boosting immunity health. Consumers are being more proactive on this. And so I do think that this is also going to be a lasting trend going forward. So, what can you do to elevate those comfort foods that consumers really craved so that they stay and remain relevant as our safety levels go up and we feel like trying something a little bit new? And what functional ingredients can you call out on your menus and in your products? So there's also been some real changes in how we prepare food. During the lockdown period, when we had that extra discretionary income, we went out and we invested in that high-end coffee maker, that Instapot. And so those things are not going away. Air fryers were another thing. But, as things open up, things are going to get busier as well. So consumers, we know that going into this, we used to talk about meals as being more meal assembly. There wasn't a lot of scratch cooking. People got back into scratch cooking and recipes as a way of entertainment. But the interesting thing is, even after over a year of this, most Canadians don't think their ability to manage meals throughout the day has really gotten that much better. And we know that there's this thing called decision fatigue. So as you go through your day, your brain gets tired. With all the decisions you make. If Obama is a data geek, and he knew this as well. So he only wore a certain color suit and shirt, and he had a number of those in his closet, but it meant in the morning he didn't have to think about what he was going to wear today. He took away one of those small decisions, but small, big decisions, they all count the same in terms of brain fatigue. So what happens when we hit 4 or 5 o'clock, that decision fatigue kicks in and we have to think what's for dinner. So anything that you can do to help with that as well is really going to help. And while we know consumers are busier in the kitchen, a lot of them didn't really go that far out in terms of what they were doing. They were experimenting maybe with some different spices, with some different oils, but they really were narrowing what they were doing. They were sticking kind of within their lane. And only 36% of Canadians said that they learned a new recipe. And when I say recipe, and that they added to their meal rotation, and that's basically 3 ingredients combining. That was sort of the minimum for that. So I think there's a role for artisanal ingredients, sauces, spices, flavored oils to kind of elevate that every day. Because the average consumer only has about 5 meals that they keep rotating throughout for dinner. So what can you do to elevate that? The other thing we saw with the pandemic was meal kits really got a second life. So going into the pandemic, meal kits had kind of fallen off. We'd seen some of the big players in the US actually declare bankruptcy. We'd seen what I'd call meal kit 2.0, which was the grocery store getting involved with meal kits. So they were a little more affordable there. But during the pandemic, there was a huge resurgence in meal kits. But we also know there's a lot of churn. A lot of people are playing them off, different subscriptions, different discounts. And, the main barrier to this is cost, right? And as things go open up, and then we've got different places to put our discretionary income, I do think this area could get squeezed more. It's an expensive way to feed a family as well. But one thing we're seeing is, that middle market getting squeezed, but then there's this high-end restaurant meal kits. So like chef inspired, chef curated. And we're also seeing, you can see at the bottom there, what I call more meal solutions. And this is a breakfast box that you can buy at Pusateri's, and it has a number of different ingredients, a lot of local call outs as well. So I wonder if, now that we've seen a resurgence with breakfast as well at home, you're starting to see these farmhouse breakfast boxes pop up as well. So, if consumers are going a little bit backwards in terms of their pre-pandemic meal assembly, what can you do to help them and elevate that meal assembly? And what products can you develop for all those new kitchen gadgets that they have, right? Meal kits for Instapots, air fryer products, elevated coffee drinks for consumers. And I alluded to the return of breakfast. We've certainly seen a different way of eating, especially as we've worked from home. So if you look at restaurants, the big hit is breakfast and lunch. Those are the meal occasions. People aren't going out and grabbing that breakfast sandwich from Timmy's or Starbucks and that cup of coffee. They're making it at home. They're eating it at home. As they're working from home, their kids are at home. And we think we're going to continue to see sort of a hybrid in office, working from home. Most businesses are saying they're never going to go necessarily back to 5 days because working from home was good for productivity, wasn't great for culture, collaboration. So we're expecting a hybrid model. But I'll tell you, in Toronto, I have seen Starbucks closing in downtown Toronto for the first time ever. And it's not just one or two. So there has been a fundamental shift in day parts and in terms of traffic that you need to look at. So, breakfast is back. Those elevated coffee drinks, how can you support that as well? And I mentioned the COVID-15. Yes, it's a thing because, we were snacking a lot before the pandemic. And now we've gone back to 3 traditional meals a day plus snacking. So that's why a lot of people have gained weight. And we're seeing the frequency, variety of snacks increasing. Almost half of all food and beverage consumed now is a snack. So you have to think about that as well. And, there's different need states depending on when you're eating that snack. So snacking in the morning, it's all about health, better for you. But snacking in the evening is more like a treat, something I want to share, a reward. So different, think differently about snacks versus different times of day. And the other thing we saw during the pandemic was this real rise in direct-to-consumer shipping consumers snack boxes. So that's really interesting as well. And what are the things that Canadians are most interested in terms of snacks right now, and where are some of the gaps that they see? They're looking for more gourmet flavors, more plant-based, and more ethically sourced. And I'd imagine local would fit right in there as well. So anything you can do with that new need occasion, I think would work really well. Another new need state is this eating together via Zoom. And this is something that we think there's still going to be a role for digital in some of our occasions going forward. That Thanksgiving dinner that, Aunt Sarah can't attend in person, you're still going to invite her in. So, how can you help service that need state as well? Netflix and chill occasions, Stanley Cups parties, like these are all things that consumers are going to be looking for ways of elevating and supporting that experience. And alcohol is a big part of that. That was a change during the pandemic as well. The fact that you can now, curate a whole meal of food with beverage pairings as well. So that's a great thing to also leverage. So how can you solve for those modified breakfast and food occasions? And how can you help consumers continue to manage their weight and their resiliency, eating for health? Plant-based rising, we've seen it all. You look at the dairy case. I say that in air quotes. And over half of it's now plant-based. It's crazy. Oat milk went from 0 to number 3 in the world now, which is also crazy. And so plant-based beverages are mainstreamed. They're now consumed by more than 40% of Canadian households. And that goes even higher if you look at those under the age of 35. And we're really starting to see blurring definitions. You know, the whole vegan, vegetarian label is really going by the wayside, because if you look at the actual number of people who identify as vegan or vegetarian, it hasn't really changed in the Canadian population. Although if you look at, again, that key group under 35, those Gen Zs, those millennials, they're 3 times more likely to identify. But I think instead of thinking or, we should be thinking and that's where this rise of flexitarianism is coming from. People want to, for different reasons, they want to increase their plant-based, especially protein. And, you know, again, for younger people, it's more about their values. It's more about planet, climate change, and animals. Whereas older people, it's more about health. And we also know that direct-to-consumer channels are overdeveloped for plant-based proteins. And we're seeing lots of things in the press. I mean, every week I think I read about a recipe site or a Michelin chef's restaurant that are going vegan. But if you look at it, you know, the rate of eating meat hasn't gone down that much. I think that could change going forward. I really do think we are at a tipping point right now. Consumers are starting to trade up in terms of meat to things that they think have higher values. So whether that is sustainable, certified humane, or even local, right? A number of people are now having those direct farmer relationships. You know, grass-fed. So we think people will be eating less, but better in a way, continuing with those direct-to-consumer relationships. But again, I do believe we're at a tipping point in terms of plant-based, because you've seen what's happened with dairy. With protein, you know, quick serve restaurants, that's where a lot of change starts in food service and it moves through the rest of the food ecosystem. So you saw A&W popularize Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger in Burger King. And so there's been a lot of trial, there's been a lot of people trying these out. So, you know, if you look at history, we used to eat this much beef and this much chicken. And in the course of a few decades, that's actually flipped. And as we're looking at rising food inflation, I think that, you know, we're also going to see some more changing here as well as just the fact that climate change is going to be, you know, it is here. No, you know, nobody's denying that anymore. We're seeing that every day. And there's that carbon tax that's coming as well. So we're going to start to pay the real price of things as well. But if I look at vegetarian meat substitutes, they're kind of defining themselves by what they aren't. Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger, and you know, these meat analogs. If you look at the list of ingredients, they're quite long. They're considered an ultra-processed food. So while they may they hit the taste button for a lot of consumers. I think a lot of people, once they get through that honeymoon period, they're starting to read the label and also starting to wonder, you know, is this really a better food for me? It may be better for the planet, but is it necessarily better for me? So I think there's going to be a reckoning as well. And I think there's going to be more calling out of the protein quality as well as the climate footprint of different proteins. And in fact, there was just a recent study in Ireland where they said that 1 in 4 meat substitutes did not contain enough protein to actually be considered a source of protein. I'm seeing that right now with a lot of jackfruit products as well. So I think it's true. Earth Day is now becoming every day. You really have to bake that into your business. So what's going to be your best way to support your clients' desire to lighten their climate and carbon footprint? And then it's going to go into one more fun trend before we open it up for, I hope, lots of questions and discussion. So, there's this, what's good for me is good for Fido. And certainly during the pandemic, we saw, lots of pandemic puppies popping up and being adopted, which is great. The other thing, though, we know is that pets consume 20% of the world's meat. So they have a huge carbon footprint. And we also know those younger consumers, millennials, Gen Z, those under kind of 35, they're very much about aligning their buying decisions with their values. And so I call the ick proteins, those mealworms, insects, which I don't think are going to be ready for prime time for consumers anytime soon. But I do think there could be potential for them with dog and cat food, because a lot of allergies to meat within that group. So that makes sense. And if you want to talk about blurring lines, this is actually a meal kit for dogs, and that is a beef oat blueberry smoothie bowl. So talk about what's good for me is good for Fido. And if you want to see that line blurring even more, I don't believe it's in Canada yet, but in the US, Ben & Jerry's have come out with a line of frozen doggy desserts. It's using all the same pretty much plant-based ingredients that they use in their consumer product. And the interesting thing is they're shelving it right beside the Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So when you treat yourself, you can treat your pup as well. So you're really seeing, products not being out into a different section. And I think we're going to see more of this because, if you look at the big companies, the Nestle's of the world, the General Mills, they also have a pet food division to the company. So I think we're going to see more of these blurring lines. We're certainly seeing gluten-free trend with humans. So of course it's going to be a trend in pets. And the other thing we know is only 13% of consumers actually feed their dogs exclusively pet food. So there's a huge area there to play in, I think. So, when you're developing your products, ask yourself, can you also be treating that companion animal, right? What's good for me is good for Fido. So, if you're doing meal kits, if you're doing delivery, is there an opportunity to add some, freshly baked dog biscuits? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a minute, but you can scan the QR code and download the copy of the Nourish Trend Report website there to find some others. We also have, I think, a pretty great newsletter that comes out monthly to keep you on top of trends. So again, you can grab a subscription at nourish.marketing. Link in, please. And any questions beyond this, you can find me easy email, the letter J at nourish.marketing. No .com, no .ca, just .marketing. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Joanne. That was riveting. I trust that everyone was hanging off of it just as much as I was. I'm going to open it up for questions. So if you've got a question that you'd like to throw into the mix, pop it into the chat. If it's a kind of a complicated question and you want to sort of preamble it or whatever, feel free to use the reactions button to put up your hand or otherwise indicate that you'd like to ask a question. While we're waiting for questions to come in, Joanne, I actually have a question to kick us off with. And the question that I have for you is, you've done such a beautiful job of helping us see what the future might hold. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about, so, we're seeing what's emerging, what's growing, what's taking hold, what's dying, what's moving out, what's so over, what's kind of coming to the end of its play.
Ooh, that's a good one. What's coming to the end of its play? I think long ingredient lists, right? Right. You know, the whole clean label, and just claims like, you know, you saw this big, natural was sort of the word, but there was nothing behind it. And I think, you know, I call it faux craft. We've all seen the big manufacturers try to look like a little guy, right? With their packaging, with their naming. But I think with the consumer desire for transparency, that's going to come to an end. You know, consumers are going to know that, you know, such and such is actually owned by that big conglomerate, right? So I think you're going to see an end to some of that as well.
Love that. Thank you. Questions from the crowd, if you want to pop them in the chat. And while we're waiting for those to come in, Joanne, maybe I could ask you a follow-up question just based on some of the businesses that I'm seeing here. I wonder if you'd like to comment from a marketing perspective on how important it is for producers and food business owners to be kind of front and center in their own marketing. How much do consumers want to know about the person who's behind the product? What is it that they want to know about that person? Like, what does it look like to be in your marketing in a productive and useful way?
Mm-hmm. I mean, put a face on it, put a story behind it. You know, why did you start your food business? Everybody wants to know that question, right? Because everybody, I think, at heart wants to be a food entrepreneur. This is what I've discovered. Everybody has a whatever. Everybody has the best tasting whatever. But what was it that got you into this business? If you're a farmer and it's been generations passed down, talk about that, because, you know, as I said, people trust farmers, not necessarily farming. So put a face on it. And, you know, the big guys have figured this out. If you look at the McDonald's of the world, you know, there were years where they didn't even advertise their end products, their Egg McMuffin. They were advertising the farmers, the beef farmer. They were advertising the egg farmer, the people who raise the inputs. And that was a way, you know, and they put their faces and they talked about the families and the values of those families in the food that they were raising and producing. And that's how McDonald's was trying to play the local card. But you don't have to do that. You know, you've got that naturally. So it's just telling that story and just being genuine. And I always say, you know, transparency, people get really worried about it. Nobody expects you to be perfect, right? You're allowed to be, you know, let people see the flaws. And tell them, take them on a journey, right? You're not carbon neutral right now. That's okay. But tell consumers where you want to go and tell them how you're going to take them on the journey there. So you're going to get credit for that. And again, we all want to support the little guy, right? It's that whole hero's journey. So bring them into that and get them involved in your story.
I love that. I want to throw it open to the people who are in the audience. I want to hear about, and feel free to, you can unmute yourself and throw something into the mix. I'd love to hear about what things really resonated for you in Joanne's talk, and what opportunities are you seeing for your own business in what she was talking about? Beach veggie, what do you got for us?
Oh, lots of things I resonated with. The local has been, I grew up in a very ethnic background and food was always cooked at home. I don't know if that's what you meant by scratch cooking. We called it slow cooking, and that was a big thing. So recipes were passed down simply by watching. I don't write things down, but now I have to write things down so that I reuse the recipes and provide consistency. But for me, what stood out was the local. What I've been doing with my business is growing. I have a garden, so my business is accompanied by a veggie garden, and I'm working with a local farmer to plan the garden for next year and expand it and provide more of the ingredients for the items that I'm cooking. You talked about a lot of things that I've already been doing because of the way I was raised. I've been thinking how I'd like to bring some of the family recipes into available for clients. One thing I've done is there's a spinach pie recipe. It's called Spinach Pie Recipe, and I have a vegan version of it. that I make. And you're right about not making make mistakes. You're allowed to do that. I'll test things, and if I like it, I think other people will like it, and I'll give it a go. The air fryer product, like making things for different products. When you mentioned about having products, I realize that's one thing, and the whole limit of brain fatigue. I don't have a lot of appliances. I like to chop things by hand. I like to have that connection to the food. So I like to be more involved in it. That I feel gets passed on to the consumer. I'm in a unique situation though that didn't get addressed, is that I have a commercial kitchen from my home. And that's how I pivoted from an external location where I was providing takeout. And it works with the town very well. And so I do have curbside pickup. And in terms of offering alcohol or drinks and beverages, that would be working or collaborating with others. But what I'd love to do is offer an educational meal. Come on over and have, no, someday, somehow. But the idea is to gather around a table and provide a 3-4 course meal where all the ingredients are talked about. Where are they from? Why are they good for you? What's their value? And have that meal, have the beverage as you're listening. And as we've been all, if you have a beverage listening to Joanne, it's a similar experience. So it becomes an experience. It's educational as well, but it's also fun. And I've been thinking about that for a couple of years, and I might not do it, but I'd love to do it. And I love that it's a trend. I love that there's a big trend, and I want to meet more like-minded people, like people who are doing
an interesting thing we saw with food service having to pivot as well with their meal kits and meal deliveries. They sent along tasting notes, from the chef that walked people through everything. And some places actually provided a playlist to go along with a chef curated playlist to go along with the food, which was kind of interesing.
Yeah, I love
so there's
the
lots of things you can do, right, to kind of bridge between that in-person event to at-home event as well.
Right. So with people more online is what I was wondering, is how you create those experiences online.
Yeah. And part of that was the Spotify playlist that chefs would come up. If it was an Italian meal, they'd have some music that went along with that. So, think about creating an experience. Consumers will pay more for an experience than just a meal.
I love that you said that, Joanne. Last night, I attended a really good talk on creating experiences that was put on by the RTO7 group that some of you may be familiar about. Sarah, if you happen to have a handy link to that RTO7 site with all the programs, there are some really good opportunities to work with people who are experts at turning kind of products into experiences, using your space that you already have to create an entire experience. I'd love to, and Vitan, I'm going to get to you in 1 second. I know you've got your hand up. One of the things I'd love for us to do is to just pop into the chat, and could we hear what kind of business are you in? I think it would be useful at this juncture for us to hear, what are you doing, so that we just have a sense of kind of who's in the room and what kinds of businesses are here. And then I'm going to get us into sharing some of the things that we've done over the course of the pandemic to pivot into kind of new ways of doing things, because it sounds like there might be some interest in hearing some of that. While people are popping into the chat to introduce themselves and their businesses, Vitana, what do you have for Joanne as a question?
Sorry, hi. I was actually typing in my business, but I guess I'll just introduce myself. I'm Vita. I'm from Owen Sound. I am a co-owner with my spouse of an ice cream parlor. And actually, I just wanted to kind of comment on what you and Joanne said about the experience. Because, we are in a very, very simple business market. It's an ice cream. There's nothing special about that. And we actually leaned in towards the experience. And that's where, and one of the things that I said at the beginning was that I think a lot of food services are going into that experience model, because if you cannot sit down, if taking your lunch to a picnic, everything has to be an experience. So I just kind of wanted to maybe have Joanne elaborate more of what kind of experience she's thinking will be common or what people will go after. Because I do think that is where most businesses are going after, because you kind of need to create something for people to come in. Yeah.
So I'd say think when you're thinking experiences, think solution as well. So how can you make it easier for consumers as the world gets busier and gets opened up, but they still want to have these high touch experiences, right? So that's why I brought up the picnic. There's lots of people who are actually, especially in Toronto, curating a picnic. So you can order for however many people, you tick off different things, you go, you pick it up, and you've got everything in a hamper. From the alcohol, if you want alcohol, through to the servingware, and the tablecloth. So it's, a complete experience. So I think thinking that way, and how you can just support consumers in different ways, and make their lives easier and also healthier. So maybe it's, that elevated brunch box once a week. What could that look like? Because we've really looked at meals becoming more than just, fill me up and give me something tasty, right? Over the pandemic, meals turned into something bigger, into an experience. It was, we were looking at this as entertainment. We were all so bored. It was like, okay, what's for dinner? Everybody got involved. But when I say people were cooking, that definition of cooking is not necessarily what we made, those of us who cook from scratch. It's not the same thing. It's still kind of meal assembly. So, how can you solve for that? How can you provide things to take what they've got, which is maybe like this, but take it up a notch, right? So if it's their mac and cheese, what can you provide them to, add a few truffles or some lobster or something to turn it, make it special and elevate it from the everyday.
Great answer,
Oh, I see
Joanne.
somebody put eco-friendly cutlery in there. Yeah, absolutely. That's something that took a pause during the pandemic, that whole single-use plastic, because, everybody had to start using that again from a safety standpoint. But consumers are going to be looking at that going forward as well. It's going to come back with a vengeance.
For sure. And one thing we've noticed, so we also serve a vegan, they call it plant-based ice cream. And what we've noticed, we actually got little cups for the plant-based scoops, and they were craft. So they were made out of paper, and customers actually really resonated with that. And then we just switched the whole, we had, biodegradable from the beginning. Like, we were not going to go after plastic or, cardboard and, but yeah, once we switched our dairy for the craft paper cups as well, and that is just, people just appreciate that.
Yeah, and it looks more homemade in a way too, which makes it feel more craft and local.
Beautiful. So I want to hit a question that was in the chat, and then Karen, I'm going to come to you, and then we're going to move into the next thing that we're going to do, which will be very exciting. So the question in the chat from Janet Barnfire on Queen, she says, as Canadians learn more about reconciliation and the history of settlement of Canada, how do you see this will impact marketing and trust of generational farmers? And I think actually that there's some interesting stuff. One of the things that I'm just noticing in other parts of my world is that I'm suddenly seeing an explosion of Indigenous music, Indigenous culture, Indigenous art. What do you think the impact is going to be on food of this moment of reconciliation that we're in? And to Jen's question there, how do you see that impacting marketing and trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the pandemic spurred a lot of these discussions. We saw the whole rise in conversations online about this, and this whole social justice movement really finally took off and got the conversation space that it deserved. And I think that's also one of the great things with the pandemic. So I think for any producer, manufacturer, consumers are going to want to know, like, what are you doing to help contribute to social justice? That should be baked into the purpose, I think, of any business going forward. I think that's really, really important. And I think there's a lot of curiosity. People want to know, like, what are some of the indigenous original foods here? People want to try this. And they're also very healthy cuisines, and they're also really low footprint because it's all grown here, right? If you think about, what is it, the Three Sisters, and a lot of the gardening we saw, people were doing crops, heritage crops. So I think inviting consumers in and letting them try things and telling the story behind it is going to be big. I think there's also lots of experience, places for experience there as well. Walking people through some of the territories and talking about some of the different foods, herbs that have these healing properties that generations perhaps have forgotten or overlooked. So I think there's just a real rich cultural base there that can be leveraged in a really respectful way by the right people.
Yeah, I love that. And just to add to that a little bit, I am seeing, Jen, if you're wondering about stuff that you sort of specifically that you can put into your marketing, I am seeing a lot of very sensitive and well done land acknowledgements, promotion of Indigenous products and experiences. Like so there are definitely some models out there. Karen, let's get to your question.
Hi, so thank you, Joanne. That was really a great presentation. I'm just a small little business that I'm a holistic nutritionist, so I kind of came up with this idea. I'm a huge foodie and I wanted to make food easy for people to make because I was raised in an environment where it was all from scratch. So I just have always naturally done that. So I came up with some meal kits that have all the herbs and spices, and then there's soup kits or chili kits and organic granola. It's just with COVID, of course, we haven't been able to do the markets, so there's been a little bit of an impact in that way, but there has been some, and it's really interesting because what you're saying, people are getting tired of figuring out they're cooking, but they're tired. So I try and offer them, say to them, this is something you can keep on in your pantry. It's shelf stable. It's all vegan friendly. And the funny thing is, I'm finding I meet a lot of people where some are vegans or vegetarians and some aren't. I had a couple where it's trying to get them to think beyond just what they see. So they see it and then they just feel like, oh, what do I do with it? And then one woman bought the soup kit because I could sample it and she liked the flavor, and her husband was like, didn't want it because he was a meat eater. But the next week he came back and she bought more, and he said, I put your vegetarian chili on my burger. And I said, great, there you go. There's definitely.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be an or, it can be an and, right?
Yes. And
we're seeing a lot of blended products too. That's a trend. Those sort of 50-50 burgers, half plant-based protein, half meat protein. So, there's different ways of doing flexitarianism. And I love that, you can call your products nutritionist approved too, which is a lovely selling point as well. But just thinking about how can you eliminate one or two steps in meal preparation, right? So if you think at the most basic, when you're sending out the CSA boxes of produce, can you pre-cut the sweet potatoes? Just think about, or can you include a cooking sauce that goes with something else? So, or a spice that pairs really well with these Brussels sprouts. So just anything that you can do to elevate and also eliminate a step in the meal preparation will also hold you in good stead, I think.